Well, I think as all of you know, we've proceeded to the NDAA. It's exactly what we ought to be doing with the war raging in Ukraine and growing concerns about the movements of the Chinese in South Asia. So, fortunately, we're doing what we ought to be doing, and I think the NDAA will enjoy, at the end, pretty strong bipartisan support.
Over the past few years, the Democrats have attempted a concentrated campaign to undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. They don't like the makeup of the court. They don't like some of the decisions that are coming out of the court. And so there are proposals out there to pack the court, proposals to come up with so-called reforms, and there have been attempts to pressure individual justices on the Supreme Court by the Democrats. The only crisis at the Supreme Court is the tantrum that the Democrats are throwing and trying to undermine its legitimacy. Republicans are going to have nothing to do with that. We believe the Supreme Court is an independent branch of the government, that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court can make the policies and decisions with respect to the court that it needs, just like we would with any other branch of our government. And so, you know, the bill that's being marked up in the Judiciary Committee this week is just one more attempt in part of that concentrated campaign to undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, and I expect there's going to be a very robust discussion around that this week. What we should be doing here, instead of that, is what we have on the floor right now, and that's the National Defense Authorization Act, and trying to figure out a way to process amendments so we can deal with, as the leader pointed out, all the threats that we face around the planet today. You got a land war in Europe. You have increasing Chinese aggression all over the planet and other threats that we need to deal with. So the National Defense Authorization Act is one of the most important pieces of legislation that we deal with and process every year here. We should have a robust amendment process so senators who don't serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee can have an opportunity to get their issues, the things that are important to them, up for a vote in the Senate, and I hope that the Democrat leader, Senator Schumer, will work with us to ensure that that happens, and that we can get that bill across the finish line and deal with something that actually is meaningful and does matter to the future of this country, and quit messing around with trying to undermine and delegitimize the Supreme Court.
Joe Biden's ongoing surrender to China is picking up speed as John Kerry is now going to China to wave the white flag. You know, John Kerry has this history of climate hysteria where he has the rhetoric of impending doom and disaster. This Democrat's obsession with the climate is undermining our nation's safety, our strength, our security, and Joe Biden is playing right into China's hands. He wants all of these Americans to be forced to buy expensive electric cars and to use only energy that has no carbon attached to it. Let me point out that just 3 days before Secretary Yellen got to China, China choked off the export of critical minerals that are used in semiconductors, part of our supply chain, solar panels as well. Joe Biden continues to kowtow to the climate extremists in this country by not allowing us to drill and find and mine for critical minerals that are so necessary for our supply chain. We ought to be able to divest and diversify our supply chain, get it away from China, but Joe Biden wants to just give China the upper hand. That's what's happening. To make matters worse, Joe Biden has now told his EPA to prioritize climate over energy that is affordable, available, and reliable. Every time Joe Biden has one of these climate concessions, America gets poorer, China gets richer. So whatever they tell John Kerry and whatever he chooses to embrace from China, we cannot as Americans be deceived. China is focused on their economy, and their economy has to be run on cheap energy, and the backbone of their energy in China is coal. The carbon footprint in China is more than twice that of the United States. Theirs is growing, ours is shrinking. China is not going to give up their economy for the environment. China right now has 306 new coal-fired power plants, either in construction or being planned. So regardless of what line that Kerry and Biden may bite into, hook, line, and sinker, their path of the Democrats in terms of energy and national security is total surrender. If you want a responsible energy policy, we need to use all the energy, and we need to make it as clean as we can, as fast as we can, and do it in ways that don't raise costs for American families.
Israel is under attack. Israel is under attack from Iran. It's under attack from Iran's terrorist proxies. And as of late, Israel is under attack even from the halls of Congress. I had the opportunity to meet directly with President Herzog after his address on the floor of the House as a member of the Abraham Accords caucus. And I am extremely proud of the bipartisan work that we are doing as the Abraham Accords caucus. And a number of those measures have been included in the bipartisan Senate Armed Services Committee National Defense Authorization Act. So we need to be very clear that our allies and partners across the Middle East, that they have a friend and a supporter in me. They have a friend and supporter from our Republican conference, and they have a friend and supporter in our great United States of America.
Well, thank you all for being here again, and I am excited that the NDAA has come forward. We're going to have amendments, as we should have. It's been several years before we've been able to have a robust process, so we're all embracing that. And there's going to be a lot of, I think, aggressive policy against China, North Korea, and others, Russia and Iran, held within the NDAA. And I think you'll find broad bipartisan support, as Joni said. It was in the committee, probably be on the floor as well. I did want to highlight one particular part of the NDAA, which is called the Advance Act. It came out of our EPW committee 16-3. It is my bill that is a nuclear energy bill. We have to have United States superiority in the area of global deployment of nuclear energy. We are on the cusp of a lot of research and innovation and discovery on small modular nuclear reactors. There's a lot of excitement about it in terms of generation of power, but also using it as a fuel for industrial resources. It's cleaner, it's greener. And we now have the superior innovations. We need to keep this. That's what the Advance Act does. But it also works with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to make sure that they're responding quickly and getting the licensures of these plants up front and center so that our United States can be the technology of the future globally for nuclear energy. So I had chart envy last week because Joni had one. I think mine's a little smaller, though. But I wanted to point out, and you can't even hardly see it, but it's a chart that was generated by a report that was put out by the GAO last week, and it was about the usage of federal buildings in Washington, D.C. 24 agencies were polled to see in January, February, March how much usage they had of the federal government building. You want to talk about waste? That's what this chart's all about. This shows you that the highest usage of the buildings is a little bit over 30%. The lowest by some agencies is 9%, 9 to 10% of the available office space is actually being used. That's $2 billion a year to maintain these buildings, $5 billion a year to maintain the leases. We have got to sell off the federal government's property, or, better idea, get people into work and then sell off what's left. He's got to figure it out.
I do. I'm going to show Senator Capito what a chart's supposed to look like here. So, if you have the chance to go into a member of Congress's office, you'll oftentimes see a collection of challenge coins. They are coins given to us by members of the United States military that represent a particular unit that perhaps a commander has. But they always try to capture the character, the essence of what they do. My favorite challenge coin I've ever received, and if you came into my office, you'd see a large collection as well, came from the 341st Missile Wing out of Great Falls, Montana. That's Malmstrom Air Force Base. And the coin, and I brought it here today, was from the commander. And because you can't see it from where you're at, I did try to make a chart so maybe you can see it. And what it says on this coin from the 341st Missile Wing says, scaring the hell out of America's enemies since 1962.
You want me to hold your chart?
Thank you, thank you.
Wow, that's even worse.
Right. Shelley, thank you.
Just certainly. I'm here to serve.
But on a more serious note, that 341st Missile Wing oversees 150 intercontinental ballistic missiles that we have in Montana. Senator Barrasso also has 150 intercontinental ballistic missiles in Wyoming. North Dakota has the remaining third, 150. Those 450 intercontinental ballistic missiles are one of the most important sources of strength for our U.S. military, because these are truly weapons of mass and massive destruction that keeps our enemies at bay. As Ronald Reagan believed in the doctrine of peace through strength, those ICBMs do that. However, under this administration, under the Biden administration, we're no longer practicing peace through strength. Whether it's that Chinese spy balloon, when it came over Montana, it lingered right over our missile silos, or whether it's drag shows now that the Air Force bases are sponsoring and condoning for children, and I'm not making this up. Biden has projected American weakness around the world. This is not the military or the foreign policy agenda that Americans want. We must repair our image on the world stage. As we now take up the NDAA in the United States Senate, we'll have a chance to bolster United States national security, to push back on the Biden administration's weakness and remind the world that the United States military remains the best and the most fierce fighting force in the world. I've introduced amendments that would sanction Chinese companies and individuals involved with the spy balloon incident. By the way, as the Wall Street Journal broke the story at the end of June, we have found out that spy balloon had U.S. technology made by U.S. companies as part of their configuration. China and the rest of the world must know, and here the United States takes their brazen espionage act very seriously. It's time that President Biden and the Senate Democrats stop embarrassing the United States on the world stage.
Alex?
You said on the Senate floor in 2021 that then President Trump, or former President Trump, was practically and morally responsible for the attack on the Capitol. With a possible indictment looming, is it legitimate to charge him criminally for the events of that day?
Well, look, I've said every week out here that I'm not going to comment on the various candidates for the presidency. How I felt about that, I expressed at the time, but I'm not going to start getting into sort of critiquing the various candidates for president.
Senator McConnell, what is the best way for the Senate to get around the holds on the military promotions? Do you think that Senator Schumer should start moving them individually, or is there a breakthrough that might happen to Senator Trump?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with getting rid of the holds is you dramatically reduce the uniqueness of the Senate, which is that every single member can have an impact. And so I'm reluctant to go down that path. We have holes on both sides. What typically happens is you work it out. And I think that's where we ought to stay.
What are the red lines for Senate Republicans as it pertains to the NDAA? For example, if there's no anti-DEI amendment or an amendment that would prohibit funding for the DOD to travel, for a person to fund travel for women to get abortions, if those kind of amendments do not make it into the NDAA, will Republicans oppose the entire bill?
Well, you're asking me to predict what's going to happen as we're on the floor, both this week and likely next week. I would think at the end of the process, the NDAA would pass on a pretty strong bipartisan basis.
Thank you.